In the wizarding world, blood isn't just biology. It's politics, status, and sometimes the beginning of the end. Decades before Voldemort rose to power, a secret list was published, a so-called pure blood directory that named the 28 families deemed uncontaminated by Muggle ancestry. Some became Death Eaters, some became heroes, and some just complained about Muggles on WizBook. Today, we're going through every single family on that list. Let's uncover what really became of the wizarding world's most sacred bloodlines. Abbott. The Abbott family was one of the first names to appear in the Sacred 28, though their pure blood lineage didn't last long. By the early 1930s, Abbotts had already started marrying Muggles and half-bloods, effectively disqualifying them from the elitist ideals the list was meant to represent. One well-known descendant, Hannah Abbott, attended Hogwarts alongside Harry Potter. She was a proud Hufflepuff and later joined Dumbledore's army before fighting in the Battle of Hogwarts. Her half-blood heritage confirmed that the Abbott line no longer upheld the so-called blood purity standard. Her mother's death at the hands of Death Eaters made the family's anti-dark arts stance clear. Hannah went on to marry Neville Longbottom, proving once and for all that she wasn't remotely interested in keeping up the pure blood tradition. For a family supposedly devoted to purity, the Abbotts ended up being one of the better examples of what happens when common sense beats magical snobbery. Avery. Little documentation exists on the Avery family, which feels appropriate given how many of them ended up hiding behind masks as Death Eaters. The Avery name, however, stretches deep into wizarding history and is one of the few that maintained pure blood status for centuries. During both of Voldemort's uprisings, at least 2 Averys swore allegiance to the Dark Lord.
Welcome, my friend.
One was part of his inner circle in the First War, and another resurfaced in the Second, desperate to convince Voldemort he'd been under the Imperius Curse the whole time, a claim Voldemort didn't find especially convincing. I'll be sure to use that one the next time I do 40 and a 30 on my broom. Sorry, Officer Auror, I wasn't speeding. It was an unforgivable curse. Anyway, Avery's long-standing loyalty to dark causes makes them one of the purest examples of how pure blood obsession and poor decision-making often go hand in hand. Black. Few wizarding families carried a reputation as grand, or as self-destructive, as the House of Black. Their motto, toujours pur, translating to always pure, said everything you needed to know about their priorities. The family traced its lineage back to the Middle Ages, proudly linking itself to nearly every other major pure blood clan in Britain. The ancestral home, 12 Grimmauld Place, housed an enormous tapestry chronicling generations of Blacks, many of whom had been blasted off the family tree for marrying Muggles or expressing non-Slytherin ideals. Sirius Black, of course, became the most famous family rebel. Sorted into Gryffindor rather than Slytherin, he rejected the blood purity obsession of his parents, Orion and Walburga, and fought for the Order of the Phoenix. By contrast, his cousins Bellatrix Lestrange and Narcissa Malfoy stood firmly on the opposite side, both embracing Voldemort's ideology. The irony? Despite their fierce protection of purity, the Black bloodline ultimately ended with Sirius's death, the most poetic punishment possible for a family that spent centuries obsessed with legacy. The female line married off into the Weasleys, Potters, and Malfoys. Bullstrode. The Bullstrode family made the sacred 28 cut, but just barely. They were mostly pureblood, though it didn't take long for the bloodline to start branching out through Muggle and half-blood marriages. The proof comes from Millicent Bullstrode, a Slytherin contemporary of Harry Potter, who was confirmed to be a half-blood. Millicent became best known for an unfortunate mix-up with Hermione Granger in the Chamber of Secrets, when Hermione accidentally added Millicent's cat hair to her Polyjuice potion, transforming into a feline hybrid rather than her target. It's unclear whether the Bullstrodes ever had strong political views on blood purity, but the later generations clearly didn't align with the ideology of the Sacred 28. By the time Millicent arrived at Hogwarts, the family's pure reputation was long gone. Though to be fair, no one's bragging about being a Bullstrode anyway. Burke. The Burke family was a well-known pure-blood lineage most prominently represented by Caractacus Burke, co-founder of Borgin and Burke's in Nocturne Alley. Think of it as EBAY for evil. The shop became infamous for trading in cursed and dark magical artifacts, including Salazar Slytherin's locket, which Burke purchased from Voldemort's desperate mother, Merop Gaunt, for next to nothing. The Burkes had a knack for identifying valuable magical objects and exploiting them. Their shop later played a role in the Half-Blood Prince, when Draco Malfoy used one of its vanishing cabinets to smuggle Death Eaters into Hogwarts. Another notable member, Elizabeth Burke, appears in one of Hogwarts' Slytherin dungeon portraits. She was known to advise young Slytherins to be nasty to mudbloods, which tells you exactly where the family stood on blood politics. If any family on the Sacred 28 list exemplified opportunism over morality, it was the Burkes, loyal to whoever had the gold, not necessarily the cause. Carrow. The Carrows were another pureblood family with an extensive dark legacy. Their line stretches back to at least the 1920s, when one of their relatives aligned themselves with Gellert Grindelwald. But the family's true infamy came decades later with Alecto and Amicus Carrow, siblings and enthusiastic Death Eaters. When Voldemort seized control of Hogwarts, Alecto was appointed Professor of Muggle Studies, while Amicus took over Defense Against the Dark Arts, both using their positions to torture students under the guise of discipline. Geez, detention never sounded so good, I'd even take the Black Quill. Their actions were so horrific that even by Death Eater standards, they stood out as sadistic zealots. The Carrows demonstrated how the Sacred 28's obsession with blood superiority could evolve into full-blown fanaticism. Ironically, after the war, their pure blood lineage was the least interesting thing about them, overshadowed by the simple fact that everyone despised them. When even other Death Eaters think you're a bit much, that's saying something. Crouch. The Crouch family was one of Britain's oldest and most respected pure blood dynasties, but their downfall became one of the darkest stories in magical history. They were distantly related to the Blacks, Yaxleys, Longbottoms, and Weasleys, forming part of the tangled web of wizarding aristocracy. The most prominent figure was Bartemius Crouch Sr., the rigid, rule-obsessed head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. His dedication to order and punishment made him a powerful ministry figure and an awful father. His son, Barty Crouch Jr., was a devoted Death Eater. After being imprisoned in Azkaban, he escaped with his mother's help through a polyjuice potion swap, a decision that led to catastrophic consequences. Disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, he infiltrated Hogwarts during the Triwizard Tournament, manipulated the Goblet of Fire, and delivered Harry Potter straight to Voldemort. Barty Jr.'s eventual capture and the Dementor's kiss brought the Crouch family to extinction. A lineage once synonymous with discipline and respectability ended in disgrace, proving that pure blood doesn't mean pure judgment. Fawley. The Fawleys were a quieter member of the Sacred 28, known more for political influence than scandal. Hector Fawley served as Minister for Magic from the 1920s into the 1930s, during the tense years leading up to Grindelwald's War. His leadership was short-lived and largely unremarkable, which, in political terms, is saying something. Most members of the Fawley family were sorted into Hufflepuff House, suggesting a mild temperament compared to their Slytherin-heavy peers. Despite their pure blood status, there's no record of them engaging in extremist or Death Eater activity, and by the late 20th century, the family name had quietly faded from prominence. Flint. The Flint family's history stretches far back, though most wizards today associate the name with one person, Marcus Flint, captain of the Slytherin Quidditch team during Harry Potter's early years. But the Flint's connections to powerful families ran deeper. Ursula Flint, for instance, married Phineas Nigellus Black, linking their lineage to the House of Black. Earlier still, Josephina Flint served as Minister for Magic in the early 1800s, one of the rare examples of a woman holding the position in that era. The Flints held onto their pure blood status but never quite achieved the infamy of the Malfoys or the reverence of the Blacks. Their legacy is mostly that of steady Slytherin ambition, cunning enough to stay relevant, quiet enough to avoid disgrace. And considering Marcus Flint's brute force style on the Quidditch pitch, it's safe to say subtlety was never a family trait. They make trolls look diplomatic. Gaunt. The Gaunt family was perhaps the darkest and most infamous bloodline on the entire Sacred 28 list. Direct descendants of both Salazar Slytherin and Cadmus Peverell, the Gaunts embodied everything wrong with blood purity obsession, arrogance, isolation, and inbreeding. Their determination to preserve the line led them to marry within the family for generations, resulting in severe mental and physical decline. You know how you don't preserve a family bloodline? Turn the family tree into a circle. By the late 1800s, the once powerful house had fallen into poverty, living in a collapsing shack outside Little Hangleton. Among the most notorious Gaunts were Marvolo Gaunt, a violent patriarch obsessed with his ancestry, Merope Gaunt, his abused daughter and mother of Tom Riddle, and Morphin Gaunt, her deranged brother who took the blame for a murder committed by his nephew, Voldemort himself. The Gaunts also carried one of Slytherin's greatest treasures, his serpent-engraved locket, later turned into a Horcrux. Their ability to speak Parseltongue was the last surviving remnant of Slytherin's bloodline, though by the end, all that remained of the Gaunts' noble heritage was a madman who destroyed everything they'd ever lived for. Greengrass. The Greengrass family stood out among the Sacred 28 for taking a surprising turn away from bigotry. Initially staunchly pure-blooded, later generations became notably more progressive. This shift was most evident in Astoria Greengrass, who married Draco Malfoy after the war. Astoria openly rejected the anti-Muggle beliefs her ancestors once held, even raising her son, Scorpius, with compassion and tolerance, much to the disgust of her in-laws. The Greengrasses maintained a reputation for elegance and restraint, never aligning themselves openly with Voldemort or the Death Eaters. If anything, they symbolized the quiet reformation of the old bloodlines, proof that not every pure family ended in ruin or arrogance. Their inclusion in the Sacred 28 may have once been a badge of honor, but by the time of Astoria's generation, it was little more than a historical embarrassment. Lestrange. The Lestranges were pure-blood elitism embodied in human form. Wealthy, ancient, and proud of their inbreeding. Their family tree interwove with several others on the list, including the Blacks and the Rosiers, maintaining what they saw as the sacred line. Historically, they had a fascination with dark magic and produced several notorious figures, including Rodolphus Lestrange, a 19th century minister for magic, and Leta Lestrange, a Hogwarts student whose tragic story unfolded during Fantastic Beasts. But the name became infamous through Bellatrix Lestrange, born Bellatrix Black. She married Rodolphus Lestrange purely to maintain her pure-blood status, marrying for status, not love. They must have had awful Christmases. Though her true devotion was reserved for Voldemort. Together, the Lestranges became two of his most loyal and unhinged Death Eaters, participating in torture, murder, and the downfall of countless families. The Lestrange family's obsession with purity ultimately mirrored their fate, consumed by their own darkness and left without heirs to carry on their legacy. For all their claims of superiority, the Lestranges managed to prove only that madness can, in fact, be hereditary. Longbottom. The Longbottom family was one of the oldest pure-blood houses in Britain, a lineage respected for honor rather than elitism. While some families clung to blood purity as a form of superiority, the Longbottoms built their legacy on service. Many became aurors or prominent ministry officials, known for their bravery and integrity. The most famous member, of course, is our hero Neville Longbottom, who began his Hogwarts life as the shy, forgetful boy constantly misplacing his toad, and ended it as a war hero who destroyed Voldemort's final Horcrux, Nagini. Neville's parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom, were tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange and her fellow Death Eaters, an event that defined Neville's life. Raised by his stern grandmother, Augusta, he grew up under the shadow of expectation but ultimately rose above it, proving that true courage has nothing to do with bloodlines. The Longbottoms never displayed fanaticism about their ancestry. Their inclusion on the Sacred 28 was by heritage alone, not ideology. In a world full of prejudice, the Longbottoms quietly represented what pure-blood families could have been if they'd chosen decency over arrogance. Macmillan. The Macmillan family also traced its roots deep into wizarding history. Though they were technically a pure-blood house, they were known for neutrality rather than extremism. Their most recognizable descendant, Ernie Macmillan, was a loyal Hufflepuff and member of Dumbledore's army. He often reminded others that his family had been pure blood for generations, but unlike Draco Malfoy, he said it more out of pride than prejudice. Throughout history, the Macmillans maintained a reputation for respectability without fanaticism. During Voldemort's rise, they openly supported Albus Dumbledore and opposed Death Eater ideology, showing that purity of blood didn't have to mean purity of heartlessness. The Macmillans proved that you can appear on the Sacred 28 list without needing a tattoo on your arm or a family tree full of inbred lunatics. Malfoy. Arguably the most iconic of all the Sacred 28 names, the Malfoy family embodied everything pure blood was supposed to represent: power, wealth, and manipulation. They lived in Malfoy Manor, a sprawling Wiltshire estate that hosted everyone from ministry officials to Death Eaters. Their lineage dates back to the Norman Conquest, and the family has always had a knack for staying close to power, first flattering Muggle kings and later working through the Ministry of Magic. They were known for political cunning, influence, and an almost allergic reaction to humility. A Patronus is meant to represent a wizard's happiest moments. A Malfoy's Patronus surely is just an empty black room with no doors and windows, right? Lucius Malfoy, his wife Narcissa, and their son Draco epitomize the modern Malfoys. Lucius served as one of Voldemort's most visible Death Eaters until the family realized loyalty to the Dark Lord was a poor retirement plan. By the Battle of Hogwarts, the Malfoys' allegiance had shifted from ideology to self-preservation, a survival tactic that ultimately saved them. Ironically, while the Malfoys spent centuries guarding their pure blood, it was Draco's marriage to Astoria Greengrass that redeemed the family name. The once feared Malfoys ended up raising one of the kindest children in the wizarding world, irony at its finest. Nott. The Nott family is one of the most secretive and least documented bloodlines within the Sacred 28, but their influence runs deep. Their name carries weight in Slytherin history, and several generations of Notts were educated at Hogwarts under that banner. Imagine how hard it was to introduce yourself when your surname is Nott. The most notable modern descendant is Theodore Nott, a quiet but intelligent student in Draco Malfoy's year, known for his aptitude in arithmancy and defense against the dark arts. Though he largely avoided the spotlight, his father, Mr. Nott, was a confirmed Death Eater, loyal to Voldemort during both wars. The family's patriarch, Cantankerous Nott, is widely believed to have authored the Pure Blood Directory itself, the document that classified the Sacred 28. Whether or not he truly wrote it, his reputation as a bitter elitist made him the perfect suspect. The Notts perfectly represent the type of family that inspired the entire list: proud, isolationist, and convinced that blood purity equated to worth. Ironically, their survival after the war depended less on their pedigree and more on how quietly they could fade into the background. Ollivander. The Ollivanders are one of the oldest wizarding families in existence, so old in fact that their lineage predates the foundation of the Ministry of Magic. The name has been synonymous with wand-making since 382 BC, when the first Ollivander opened shop in Diagon Alley. The family's founder, Gaunt Ollivander, is believed to have brought wandcraft to Britain during the Roman occupation. Over centuries, the Ollivanders refined their craft to perfection, becoming the undisputed masters of wand lore. Their descendant, Garrick Ollivander, was the most famous wand maker of the modern age. He personally crafted the wands of both Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort, twin cores of phoenix feather, binding the destinies of their owners forever. The Ollivanders never showed political extremism or prejudice. They were purebloods by birth, but craftsmen by trade, respected by all sides. While other families fought to prove superiority, the Ollivanders quietly supplied everyone with the tools to fight each other. I wonder what their investment portfolios look like. Seems sus. Parkinson. The Parkinson family was another of the old pureblood clans, though far less distinguished than they like to believe. Their reputation reached its peak, or possibly its low point, with Pansy Parkinson, a smug and sharp-tongued Slytherin student infatuated with Draco Malfoy. Pansy's sneering attitude toward Muggleborns and her infamous cry to hand Potter over to Voldemort during the Battle of Hogwarts cemented her family's reputation for cowardice rather than courage. Historically, the Parkinsons had political presence. Perseus Parkinson served as Minister for Magic in the 1700s, but that influence faded over time. By the modern era, their name carried more gossip than glory. They were the type of family that loved the prestige of the Sacred 28 list, but contributed little of substance to wizarding history, more known for insults than innovation. Prewett. The Prewett family held pure-blood status but rejected the elitism that came with it. They were closely related to the Weasleys, and their values aligned far more with decency and courage than with ideology. One of the most well-known Prewetts was Molly Weasley, born Molly Prewett, who went on to marry Arthur Weasley, a union that likely horrified any remaining pure-blood purists. Molly's brothers, Gideon and Fabian Prewett, were members of the Order of the Phoenix during the First Wizarding War. They fought valiantly against the Death Eaters and were ultimately killed by them, a loss so significant that Alastor Moody later kept their names engraved on a keepsake clock. The Prewetts were described as having the distinctive red hair and large noses that later became trademarks of the Weasley clan. Though technically part of the Sacred 28, the Prewetts made it clear that blood purity meant nothing compared to bravery. Their legacy lives on not through ancient records but through Molly's family, who helped save the wizarding world while the so-called noble families tore it apart. Rosier. The Rosiers were an old and powerful pureblood family believed to have French origins. Unlike some of their quieter peers, they were unapologetically proud of their heritage and deeply involved in dark politics. During the early 20th century, a Rosier was among Gellert Grindelwald's supporters, foreshadowing the family's long association with dark wizards. Decades later, Evan Rosier emerged as one of Voldemort's Death Eaters, notorious for dueling Mad-Eye Moody, during which he managed to remove part of Moody's nose before being killed. The Rosiers prided themselves on elegance and pure lineage, but fell into the same trap as many others, believing their ancestry made them untouchable. In the end, it didn't. Their bloodline may have been ancient, but by the conclusion of the Second Wizarding War, their influence was nothing more than another cautionary footnote in the history of arrogance. Rowle. The Rowle family occupied a strange middle ground among the Sacred 28, ancient and respected, but morally flexible. One early member, Damocles Rowle, served as Minister for Magic in the 1700s and implemented harsh laws against Muggles. His tenure was marked by paranoia and persecution, setting the tone for how the Rowles would later be perceived. Centuries later, Thorfinn Rowle followed the family tradition of poor decision-making by becoming a Death Eater under Voldemort. Known for brute strength and limited intellect, he was more enforcer than strategist, a wizard who preferred destruction to dialogue. Adding to the dark legacy, Euphemia Rowle later became the guardian of Delphine, the daughter of Voldemort and Bellatrix Lestrange, ensuring that the Rowle family name remained entangled with the darkest threads of wizarding history. The Rowles never seemed to learn that heritage doesn't guarantee wisdom, just a longer list of terrible ancestors. Selwyn. The Selwyn family were a high-status pureblood lineage, frequently mentioned alongside other elite wizarding houses. Their name carried enough weight that even Lord Voldemort once referenced it as an example of noble blood. Historically, the Selwyns were associated with the Ministry and held positions of influence, though not much direct documentation survives. What is clear is that at least one Selwyn became a Death Eater, taking part in the kidnapping of Luna Lovegood during Voldemort's reign, a convenient way to paint the family name on a most wanted list. Interestingly, Dolores Umbridge once claimed she descended from the Selwyns, though this was never verified. Considering her pathological need for authority and pure blood posturing, it's not hard to imagine she simply invented the connection for credibility. In short, the Selwyns were the magical world's aristocrats of self-importance, high-ranking, high-handed, and ultimately high-risk when it came to surviving the post-war world. Shacklebolt. The Shacklebolt family had pure blood heritage, but none of the arrogance that usually came with it. They were respected rather than feared, and their most famous member, Kingsley Shacklebolt, embodied everything that the Sacred 28 should have stood for, but didn't: integrity, skill, and equality. Kingsley was a top-tier Auror, a member of the Order of the Phoenix, and later served as Minister for Magic after Voldemort's defeat. During the Second Wizarding War, he even acted as a bodyguard for the Muggle Prime Minister, proving his loyalty to the greater good rather than outdated ideology. There's no record of the Shacklebolts ever embracing blood purity or the Death Eater's agenda. They were the rare example of a pure-blood family whose reputation actually improved over time, not through propaganda or wealth, but through consistent moral backbone. Shafiq. Very little is known about the Shafiq family, making them one of the most mysterious entries on the Sacred 28. They were confirmed purebloods when the directory was published in the early 1930s, but after that, they all but vanished from public record. It's speculated that the Shafiqs had Middle Eastern origins, as their name appears linguistically distinct from the mostly British families on the list. Some historians believe they were an ancient merchant lineage, deeply connected to the global magical trade long before the Ministry standardized international cooperation. Despite their obscurity, inclusion on the Sacred 28 implies they once held considerable prestige. However, their disappearance from wizarding society and lack of any known descendants in modern Britain suggests that the family either intermarried or relocated abroad. In the world of pure-blood elitism, the Shafiq's quiet exit might have been the smartest move anyone on the list ever made. Slughorn. The Slughorn family were wealthy, pure-blooded, and unusually pragmatic about their place in the wizarding world. Unlike most of their peers, they never flaunted their bloodline as a weapon or shield, preferring charm, social strategy, and influence to open arrogance. The most famous member, Horace Slughorn, served as both potions master and head of Slytherin House at Hogwarts, first in the 1940s and again during Harry Potter's time. Horace had a soft spot for talented students and famously cultivated a social circle known as the Slug Club, made up of those he believed destined for greatness. Among its members were both Lily Evans and Tom Riddle, a pairing that perfectly illustrates Slughorn's neutrality and occasional poor judgment. While the family was undeniably pure blood, Horace showed tolerance toward Muggleborns and half-bloods, even expressing guilt for having revealed critical information to Voldemort about Horcruxes. The Slughorns may have been on the Sacred 28 list, but they were proof that ambition didn't always lead to fanaticism. Sometimes it just led to a very exclusive dinner party. Travers. The Travers family was another long-standing pure-blood lineage, but unlike the Slughorns, they were far less concerned with charm. The Travers name became synonymous with brutality and loyalty to Voldemort. A Death Eater known simply as Travers participated in multiple murders during the First Wizarding War, most notably that of the Macmillan family, who were allies of the Order of the Phoenix. The Traverses resurfaced again during the Second Wizarding War, proving that the family had learned absolutely nothing from history. Another descendant, Torquil Travers, later served as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement in the 1990s, suggesting that the family retained political clout even after its reputation was tarnished. The Travers line demonstrates one of the Sacred 28's recurring patterns, using their influence to commit atrocities, then using that same influence to stay out of Azkaban. Weasley. Few families on the Sacred 28 list were more despised by pure-blood supremacists than the Weasleys. Despite their impeccable ancestry, the Weasleys were proud blood traitors, wizards who actively rejected the ideology of blood purity and treated Muggles and Muggleborns as equals. Living in the Burrow near Ottery St. Catchpole, the family were known for their warmth, humor, and lack of wealth, three qualities that horrified the Malfoys.
Red hair and a hand-me-down robe? You must be a Weasley.
Arthur Weasley, a ministry official obsessed with Muggle inventions, and Molly Weasley, a formidable matriarch, raised 7 children: Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred, George, Ron, and Ginny. Nearly all of them joined the fight against Voldemort, with the family's loyalty to Dumbledore's army and the Order of the Phoenix cementing their status as moral opposites to the likes of the Malfoys and Lestranges. Though mocked for their poverty, the Weasleys' compassion, courage, and unity made them one of the most respected families in wizarding history. Ironically, the so-called traitors turned out to be the only truly noble house on the entire Sacred 28 list: Yaxley. The Yaxley family was one of the darker legacies among the Sacred 28, a pure bloodline steeped in allegiance to Voldemort and the ideology of magical superiority. Although few details about their early history exist, their reputation in the modern era became defined by one man: Corbin Yaxley. Corbin served as a Death Eater during both Wizarding Wars and rose to a senior position within the Department of Magical Law Enforcement after infiltrating the Ministry during Voldemort's takeover. He was a cunning bureaucrat, the type who smiled while passing laws that ruined lives. Yaxley personally participated in raids, arrests, and torture, acting as Voldemort's administrative enforcer within the Ministry. After the Dark Lord's downfall, he was captured and imprisoned in Azkaban, though some accounts suggest that surviving members of his family remained at large. The Yaxleys prided themselves on purity, but like so many of their peers, that pride turned to poison. Their bloodline's obsession with status led them not to honor, but to infamy. In the end, they became the perfect cautionary tale for every name on the Sacred 28 list. Proof that blood may endure, but integrity doesn't always survive with it. And that was every family on the Sacred 28, the so-called purest bloodlines in wizarding history. So if you want to see how those same bloodlines ended up fighting and dying for their ideals, click over to All 3 Wizarding Wars Explained. It's where the story of pure blood meets the price of it.